Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the GD Report. I am D.
And I'm G.
And we're excited to see everyone again and wish everyone a great September so far. The days are counting down till the 2020 election. And so we know the hottest topic on everyone's mind, besides how many shopping days are left before Christmas, is let's start thinking about 2024, because you're not tired of commercials or rhetoric or campaigning yet for this election. Let's start thinking about that. So we've got a very special guest, and I'm going to turn it over to G-Man, let him introduce our guest today.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This is my good friend, Steve. Steve was a member of the award-winning newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News, before its demise in 2009. He was a member of the commentary department from 2001 to 2009, and that was the tail end of a nearly 40-year journalism career as a Colorado journalist. So welcome, Steve.
Hey, welcome, G. Welcome, D.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time. So as I mentioned, our topic tonight, we're going to talk about the 2024 election. And specifically, we're going to focus on the Republican side and prognosticate a little bit about what we think will happen as far as the nomination process goes. G-Man, you want to talk about our groupings that we have?
Yeah, so, we've got, the populists and the establishment candidates and the long shots, and there's a lot of different candidates that fall, some of them fall into multiple groups, but we've tried to break them out into, who we think has the best chance. And, we're going to talk about each and every one of them a little bit and just kind of debate it back and forth, and then hopefully come up with our own picks for who might emerge as the 2024 GOP candidate. So let's kick it off with, the obvious front runner right now, and that would be Vice President Mike Pence. So, Steve, you want to weigh in on Mr. Pence's chances and what you think?
Pence, if he wants the job, is definitely the front runner. He's going to appeal to the Trump base immediately. And he does come across a little more measured, even to the point of perhaps being bland. But he might use that to his advantage to reach out to more centrist Republicans that will increase his chances of gaining the nomination.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think he's got an interesting balance of he's obviously tied at the hip with President Trump because he's been there for the administration, but he does have enough appeal that he was in the party long enough, a member of Congress, a governor of Indiana, so he's got a little bit of everything for each wing of the Republican Party. I think it's gonna, like a lot of things we'll probably talk about today, it's gonna depend how the election comes out this time, and see there'll be a little bit of a clash for the control of the party.
Right. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, absolutely. It depends on the outcome of this election. In fact, if Joe Biden were to win, that would even open up Mr. Trump to another try in 2024.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely. We could have a second Grover Cleveland.
Well, and I was going to say that now this poll was in December, but there was an Axios poll that in December showed Pence with a huge lead, 40% over Donald Trump Jr. To get the nomination. So he definitely is the front runner.
I was somewhat taken aback that Donald Trump Jr. is even considered, but when you think about it, yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's been sort of a tradition in American politics for fathers and sons to follow one another. So it wouldn't surprise me. Plus, Donald Jr. has his dad's feistiness, which he's going to need.
Right.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, I think as we talk about some of the other challengers tonight, I think that's the thing is that so many of Trump's base, I mean, they're loyal to Trump. And
Right.
so it does lead that natural tie-in. You think about the different dynasties that we've seen over time, and with most recently the Bush family. But the last election when you had the Hillary Clinton running on a little bit of the legacy of Bill Clinton, so it's a natural tie-in for families to continue.
Right. So I think Donald Trump Jr. is setting himself up pretty nicely for a run. I mean, he's basically mimicking everything his father does, and he will definitely appeal to that base. Like you said, Steve, I think the difference between he and Pence will be will Pence appeal to a broader range, say the John Kasich side of the party, and pull that side in.
Right. That's what I think they really need is someone to cross that that spectrum of Republican voters, so that they can really draw them in. The danger is for many of these people we'll be talking about is that they are not as closely associated with Trump. So they risk losing the Trump voter who showed in the, I think 2008 or 12 rather, election that they're willing to sit on their hands if they don't like a candidate.
Mm. Good point. Who else is in our populist category, G-Man?
The next guy is at one point he was kind of high up there, but his response to the COVID crisis and some other things he's done is he's kind of fallen out of favor, and that's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Well, Ron does have that problem with the COVID thing, although, and recently there's been a bit of a spike down there, but still far behind the leading COVID states for COVID deaths, New York primarily,
Right.
far behind. And I just don't know that he has enough of a national profile to carry it across the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting is, at least in the early going, and this is the way early going, is that, Florida has several potential candidates for the 2024 nomination. And we'll get to a couple of those later on down the line. And then our last one in this category is U.S. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas.
I'd kind of like to hear what Dee has to say about DeSantis.
Yeah, I think appreciate that. The G-Man just cut me off there and was just ready to roll on. Not interested in my opinions. I mean, I think he's been hanging around Ron DeSantis too much. No, I'm kidding. DeSantis is an interesting character because I do agree that he doesn't have as much of a high profile, but he might be able to parlay some of his stance on COVID. It sounds funny when you think about it, but some of his stance on resisting the mask mandates and those kinds of things, as the way he stood up to the politically correct. And if someone was looking for an alternative to Mike Pence or to Donald Trump Jr., he might fit that mold. It just depends. I think the next couple of years, maybe his success if he runs for reelection and wins, and he could be that alternative. And again, I know I've said this before, and it's obviously the 900-pound gorilla in the room, but depending on the outcome of this election, he's definitely was loyal to Trump. And we'll talk more about what Mr. Trump does later, but it could be, he could be a good alternative there. You never know.
Right. So moving on, that brings us to Tom Cotton. So
again, not a great national profile, despite his controversial op-ed in the New York Times.
Right.
To which the New York Times contributed considerable controversy itself.
Right.
But
He kind of played the New York Times and played them pretty well.
he
Yeah,
did play them pretty well.
they gave him a badge to wear for sure. I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys saw this today, but President Trump did release his, like he did in the last election, released his list of potential Supreme Court nominees should he win re-election, and he released that today. And
Oh,
Tom Cotton was actually one of the names listed on
really?
there. Tom
Right.
Cotton and Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley from Missouri. So a little interesting statement there. And Cotton, Hawley was quick to say, kind of gave a Sherman-esque, I'm not interested in serving. Should I be chosen? I want to serve the people of Missouri. But Cotton was pretty open to it. He said he's open to serving his country in whatever capacity he could. And then he also sent out a tweet that said, Roe v. Wade must go.
Right.
So he's definitely a lightning rod for that side of the party to get them charged up and get that base excited. But I'm wondering if President Trump is thinking about Don Jr. running, maybe that's a way for him to clear the field.
Exactly. It's just what I was thinking.
Nominate one of the competitors.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Cotton, I think, because of that op-ed, has some upside with the base. He's also good friends with Bill Kristol, and Kristol carries a lot of weight. So he, and the thing about primaries too is usually whoever the front runner is. Except
Kristol carries a lot of weight, but he's been so anti-Trump lately that he's kind of cutting both ways. So
right.
I'm not sure that's a big plus for him.
Well, I guess, we'll find out here in about 6 weeks, right? Whether the country has Trump fatigue or, it's
Exactly.
still willing to go. But, the thing about the primaries is, usually, at least here lately, starting with, I guess, Bill Clinton, it's that person that doesn't start off with the most name recognition, the most cash, that kind of emerges from the pack.
That's true. That's always a possibility.
Yeah. So
Carter was the same way.
Yep, exactly. So that brings us to the establishment. And starting off there is former governor of South Carolina and former ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who started out as a Trump critic and quickly moved into the Trump supporter camp. So how do you guys feel about Miss Haley and her chances?
Dee, you want to start off?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'll start off. I think she's definitely I don't want to say rising star because I feel like she's already a star in the Republican Party. So she's definitely, but she's on the upswing. I mean, she's got a little bit of everything. We speculated a while back pre-convention, Steve, that if President Trump was going to make a move on changing the ticket, that she would be the obvious choice for him to look at for a vice presidential candidate. I mean, her experience in foreign policy, her experience as the governor of a southern state, South Carolina's early in the primary process. So she's definitely an accomplished person. I think she checks a lot of the boxes that would excite the Republican base, and she also has the fundraising capabilities and the network, I believe, to maybe bridge some of that divide you were talking about earlier back to the center of the party. She definitely has been loyal to the president and was a loyal speaker for him at the convention too recently.
Yeah, she's been a supporter of the president and served in his administration as UN ambassador, but it's sort of a position far enough off to the side that she's not fully immersed in Trump world. Right. She can kind of bridge that gap, as you say, between Trump's diehard core and the rest of the Republican Party. And I think her sort of really great handling of our response to racial sensitivities in South Carolina has been a real plus for her. And I really see her as probably the biggest challenge to Trump Jr. or Mike Pence.
Yep. Now, let me ask you guys something. One of the things she did as South Carolina governor was she was instrumental in removing the rebel flag symbol from the state flag. So do you guys think that might hurt her with the base?
She didn't remove it from the state flag. She moved it from state property,
Right.
the state capitol, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
I believe you're right, Steve. I think there was one, they had a flagpole where they flew it on the state capitol grounds, and she had
Right.
it there. Yeah.
Right. So do you think that move hurts her with Trump's base? Because they seem to embrace that kind of thing.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think it's sort of a minor issue at this point for them.
and I think she's an accomplished enough politician that she can talk through that, and she's got the bona fides because she was a Southern governor who led it. It was right after the crisis at Mother Emanuel AME Church, the shooting,
Right.
and so she did lead through that time. And so it's it's kind of like a lot of things where growing up in the South, I know that there's it's one thing for Southern people to come to an understanding about something, but they sure don't like when they feel like somebody from the North is telling them what to do.
Right.
So she's got those bona fides to say, I was the governor, I led during this time, it was the right thing to do at the right time. And I think she pivots out of that. Doesn't have any trouble with that.
The other thing I think about her is that she's just moderate enough to pull those kind of right-leaning Democrats over. So I think she could have broad appeal if she gets the nomination.
I tend to agree. I think the fact that she's a woman also helps her in that in that segment.
Right.
And a woman of color.
Right.
Yeah, she's an immigrant. So her family's an immigrant. So, I think she's got a lot of upside for the GOP.
I think they should look seriously at her, honestly.
Right.
So years ago, when Dee and I were talking politics, I threw out a name that I said could be president someday. And this person ran twice unsuccessfully. That'd be former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. I'm going to throw out the next name on this list. And before I do, I'm going to tell you that I feel confident that this person someday will be president of the United States. That is Dan Crenshaw, the congressman from Texas. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Dan.
I thought you were going to say Steve or I's name at that point.
Right. So
No, I don't want the job. Thank you. Sorry.
Will not serve if your party nominates you.
So the things I like about Crenshaw is he works across the aisle. He's got broad appeal. He's young. So, he's got plenty of time to, if he doesn't get it in 2024, he can run again, 10 years down the road if he wants to. He's a former Navy SEAL. He was injured in an IED in Afghanistan and lost his right eye. He originally lost vision in both his eyes, but through a lot of surgery and stuff, his left eye came back. He wears an eye patch. He's got 2 Bronze Stars, one with Valor. Obviously, he got the Purple Heart. He got the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor. And he's an excellent public speaker. And even with the eye patch, he's a pretty dashing young individual. So what do you think about Mr. Crenshaw?
He's got a lot of upsides. He is very eloquent, as you say. This was pointed out to me by my son, who said that whenever Crenshaw casts an important vote, he always accompanies it by a video to his constituents explaining exactly what he's done. So he's very good at reaching out and explaining his positions. I think he's very much a rising star, and I think you would not be far off, if in your estimation that he might be president one day.
Yeah, I just think
he definitely is great at retail politics, and he's got he won his seat in 2018 by 7.2 percentage points. At the same time, that same year with Beto O'Rourke on the ballot, that particular district went to Ted Cruz by only 1.2%.
Hmm.
But President Trump won it in 2016 pretty healthily, almost 10% margin over Hillary Clinton. So I think he does have a challenger this time, but I think he'll come out of that one. I could see a really strong ticket, and I know this is not our topic, but I could see with his military bona fides and his retail politics and the fact that he's from the state of Texas, I could see him being a really strong vice presidential candidate with Nikki Haley.
Exactly. In fact, there's a movement now out called Unity 2020, I believe, and his name is bruited about as vice presidential candidate on that ticket with Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh,
wow.
So I would find that very interesting and appealing too,
right.
especially if the plan they have for that Unity ticket where they switch roles after 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Would come about.
Yeah. Well, and he's only 36. So, Nikki Haley, Crenshaw ticket, I think would be very tough to beat down the road.
I believe you're right. And another thing I like about Crenshaw is he doesn't take himself super seriously.
Right.
I mean, he's even willing to go on Saturday Night Live, for God's sakes, and talk about his eye,
Right.
Right. Yeah. So he's got, I think he's got broad appeal. I could see, even some left-leaning Democrats casting their vote for him and being proud to do so. So
now, in all fairness, the G-Man, I've got to say his prediction, was that Willard Mitt Romney would be president someday.
Oh, you did
So
say
I've just got to call him out on that because
that's never going to happen, G.
I believe what I said is, and this was way, way back. This was in 2004. I said,
as a governor,
take a look at this guy. He could be the next president of the United States, and he came close. But and I think that if the Romney that ran in 2008 that lost to McCain had run the last time he ran, I think he would have gotten elected. But because of the Tea Party had pushed him so far to the right, and of course then he had to open his mouth and utter the famous 47% comment. I think he would have won, but things are how they are, and he didn't. But
yeah,
I think Mr. Crenshaw will be president someday. I'll go on the record right now saying that.
It just proves how bruising the primary process can be sometimes,
right?
And how challenging it can be for candidates that end up twisting themselves into a pretzel like Willard did.
Yeah. So moving along, that brings us to another young Republican, another rising star, and that's Mr. Josh Hawley, the 40-year-old senator from Missouri. And he beat, am I correct in this, D? He beat Claire McCaskill?
Sure did.
Okay. And she was a pretty popular senator from Missouri. So
yeah, Missouri's trended more to the Republican column in the last several election cycles. And so McCaskill knew it was going to be a tough re-election fight. But he's an impressive young guy. He's very strong in his positions. Like I mentioned earlier, he was on Trump's short list that Trump released today for potential Supreme Court nominees. He says he's not interested in that, which may mean he may have his sights on the White House.
Right.
So I think he could be pretty formidable as a candidate. Like I said, he's got enough of an establishment tie, but he has definitely been a strong supporter of the president as well.
Right. Well, you can be president and on the Supreme Court, just not at the same time and not in the order that Trump has suggested. So we have had a former president become a Supreme Court justice.
Correct.
So, there is that. But I don't see Hawley getting a lot of traction in 2024. Things could change. He could be that dark horse that emerges like we talked about, but I think right now he would probably be like Crenshaw, better suited for a VP slot and serving 4 or 8 years in that capacity and then emerging on his own later on down the line. That brings us to a couple long shots.
Hang on a second, G-man.
Oh.
I gotta stick up for Steve. He stuck up for me earlier, man. You
All
cut
right.
him off. Steve,
Well,
what are your thoughts on Senator Hawley?
honestly, I don't know, maybe this is hubris, but the fact that I don't know much about him
Yeah.
may be reflective of the broader viewpoint of him, that he should probably set his sights on 2028 if he's going to be a factor.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And I think the interesting thing is if Joe Biden were to win in November, is we'll start to see, obviously, the campaign for 2024 will begin the day after. The day after we know. It may not be November 3rd. But,
That's right.
But once we do know, the campaign will begin in haste. And if there will be some opposition senators ready to enter the arena strongly, I'm sure, at that point. So, and a lot of folks trying to make a name for themselves. All right, G-man, I'm gonna release you now to go on to the next topic.
All right, so we've got a few long shots, and then we got a couple of wild cards. So our first long shot is the current Republican governor of blue/purple state, Maryland, and that's Larry Hogan. So Steve, we'll start with you. What do you think about Mr. Hogan and his chances?
Very slim.
Very slim.
It's he'd be hard pressed to even win his own state in a presidential race. Again, limited national profile, not really worth agonizing over his potential candidacy.
Right. D?
Yeah, I think he increased his profile a little bit during the coronavirus crisis when he had used his wife's influence and some of her family connections, I believe, from South Korea to import some ventilators and some other PPE equipment. And then he had stated that he'd called out the Maryland National Guard to protect that from being confiscated by the federal government, which was pretty wild statement and a mouthful for me to say. He definitely has that anti-Trump bent to him. And so if the party were to be somehow miraculously taken over by that wing of the party, he's definitely a candidate that could be have some traction there. Also, if there's potential for a split and a third party, I could see of never Trumpers and those kinds of folks. I could see him being somebody that they tried to push to the forefront of that particular party. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for him to win the Republican nomination straight up.
Right. So moving on, that brings us to current Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Trump urged him to run for the Senate seat in Kansas, which that looks like it's going to be a pretty tight race, and he declined. And so, there's a lot of thought that he's going to put together a run for the president in 2024. We'll start with you, D. What do you think about Pompeo's chances?
Well, he made a trip earlier this summer. I think it was in May or June to Iowa. And I just had to wonder what in the heck the sitting Secretary of State was doing visiting Republican Party events in Iowa if he didn't have at least a little sniff for the Republican nomination. So I think he will run. I think it'll be interesting to see where he fits in the dynamic because he's a very accomplished gentleman. I mean, he West Point graduate, head of the CIA before he was the Secretary of State. So he's got an impressive resume. He has been loyal to President Trump, other than choosing not to run for the nomination, which Trump wanted him to, the Senate nomination. So I think he could be formidable, but just like Steve said about Josh Hawley, maybe not to that extreme. I don't know how much name recognition he gets where people would think of him as presidential. But I've been wrong before. Not as much as G, but I've been wrong before.
I think he's got enough high enough profile and recognition factor is high enough that he could be a real spoiler.
Mm.
He's probably the brightest of the dark horses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He's very eloquent. Has a very calm demeanor, generally speaking, despite he had a blow up at one point against a reporter. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but
And who would ever blow up against a reporter, right?
well, exactly. If he could avoid that sort of pitfall, he should be a very interesting factor in 2024 if he so decides.
G-Man, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I think if Pompeo gets the nomination, which I think is a very long shot, I think whoever the Democratic candidate is will eat him alive. That's what I think.
AOC?
Let's hope not. But she is one of the, the early speculation is she will be throwing her hat into the ring in 2024. Of course, a lot of that depends on what happens here, in November. So, we'll have to kind of wait and see what takes place then. So, our next long shot is, as we mentioned, there's a lot of Florida candidates, is U.S. Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio. He ran in 2016, didn't get much traction, and the smart money says he's going to give it a shot again. So let's start with Steve. What do you think of Mr. Rubio's chances?
I don't think they're great. He didn't do that well in the last run. I think it's going to come down to, can he arouse enough support amongst the moderate wing of the Republican Party to overcome the enthusiasm of the Trump side. So I just don't think he's got what it takes to pull this off.
Yeah, I agree. Typically, and it doesn't always happen this way, but typically a lot of people, when somebody gets beat as bad as Rubio did in the primaries, it's hard for them to come back from that image. He fell for the traps. President Trump set a lot of traps for him, and he fell for it. He tried to position himself as a serious candidate, and then ended up talking about hand size and about, getting drawn into those kinds of things with and Trump gave him the nickname Little Marco, and so he kind of fell into that trap. He's the acting head of the Intelligence Committee now because of Senator Burr from North Carolina having to recuse himself right now because of the campaign finance investigation. But he, even when that report came out, he got kind of lambasted by everybody because he released the report and it was pretty scathing towards President Trump. But then he released a statement that contradicted the report that had his name on it, and so no one was happy with him. And I think that's pretty much what will happen if he tries to run again. I don't think the moderate wing will be happy with him. The Trump wing won't be happy with him, and so I think the smartest thing for him to do would be stay in the Senate, and eventually, if he wants to run for governor after DeSantis, he might go back to Florida and run for governor.
Right. So our next long shot is Florida Senator Rick Scott. Now, Rick Scott, here's a little wild card about him. He is the front runner, from what I've been seeing, for the head of the Republican Senatorial Committee. I think I've got the name of that committee right. That basically seeks out and promotes candidates for the U.S. Senate. And that will bring him into contact with the big money donors, the people that actually decide who the next president is going to be. So bearing that in mind, Dee, let's start with you. What do you think of Mr. Scott?
I think that, again, low national profile. Maybe if he gets that senatorial committee, he has a chance to increase his profile a little bit. He's, former governor of Florida. But I just don't see there being enough oxygen in the room for a candidacy by him to have success. I mean, he's got a lot of healthcare experience from, I believe it was don't want to say the name of the company, but he ran a healthcare company. I just don't see a lot of oxygen for that campaign for him. I don't see that he would excite much of the base either way. Florida's an important state, but Trump's doing. It's the last poll I saw was dead even, but there were some interesting through lines on that poll where Trump is performing very well with the Cuban community and also with non-Cuban Latinos. So
Right.
it was a little interesting on the poll. I just don't see a lot of oxygen for Rick Scott's candidacy.
Right.
Not before 2028 at the earliest.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that company was Columbia Hospital Corporation, and he merged it with, I believe it's Bill Frist's company, HCA, and it's
Right.
HCA now. So moving on, we've got 2 candidates left before we kind of throw it open. I'm going to start with a really wild card, and that's political commentator Tucker Carlson from Fox. So let's go to Steve on this one. Steve, what do you think of Tucker and his shot at the White House?
I don't think he's got a shot, but and I don't think he wants the job, honestly. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I tend to agree with Steve on that one. But I don't want to be too dismissive of him, because I also said 4 years ago that, how could a reality show
Well, that's true.
TV host?
I did the same thing.
I was like, I don't think he wants the job. I mean, I said those things, and that's not a criticism of you, Steve, but I'm going.
No, I said the same thing about Trump. I said, this is just publicity ploy. And
Absolutely. And so,
what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't discount anything from happening in the American political scene, but I agree. I think as long as he can stay on Fox News and keep that going, that's a juggernaut where you ghostwrite a couple books a year and sit back and live in the Hamptons and enjoy your time on the air. But
Right.
But he's definitely popular, definitely an influencer in the party, and a strong influencer of the president too.
Yeah.
Gee, what do you think of that?
I think he does want to be the president. I think if he thinks he has a shot, he'll take it. Coming from Fox News background, it remains to be seen whether they will follow suit as they have in the past and ask him to resign. It wouldn't surprise me if they said, yeah, you can stay on the air and campaign, and that would give him a huge boost. But I don't. In the end, I think the GOP stalwarts will go for someone a little more established and a little more of a record.
Right.
Possibly our next wild card, and that is current and the current president, Donald John Trump. So, Dee, we'll start with you. What do you think about Mr. Trump in 2024?
Well, there's a couple scenarios there. Obviously, we mentioned Grover Cleveland earlier, who lost his reelection bid and then came back and won 4 years later.
Right.
So there's always that possibility. One thing that I think everyone needs to keep in mind is that President Trump is not going anywhere, regardless of what happens in November. And I don't mean that I'm not trying to debate the military removing him from. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with in politics, no matter what.
Right.
So if he wins re-election, he's going to be emboldened, and he's going to be, he's had his supporters recently saying, 12 more years at some of the rallies, and so there's, it's conspiratorial, but there's thoughts about whether he tries to get a constitutional amendment to change so that he could run for a third term. And he says, his first term was wasted on the Mueller investigation, so that shouldn't count. But regardless of what happens, he is going to be around. He's going to be tweeting every day. There's not going to be any of this decorum about waiting and not criticizing your successor. I mean, whatever, if Biden were to win, every single day we're going to see it, we're going to see tweets from him. I remember George F. Will recently said, that the Republican Party needs a timeout in this election, and that once the election happens and Joe Biden wins, as Will's quote, that no one will admit to being a Donald Trump supporter and that people will forget Donald Trump's name. I don't see that happening.
No, I don't either.
In any account, and so he'll be around. And it would not shock me at all if he were to lose this election, if he didn't say, obviously try to contest the election, and then when he's exhausted all ways to contest it, then announce, well, I'm running in 4 years and the campaign starts now.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised either.
Now, let me throw you guys a wild card for the wild card. Let's say November Trump wins, and there's some talk now about repealing the amendment that limits a president to 2 terms, and that would allow Mr. Trump to run for a 3rd term. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think there's some possibilities there, but I like to think that our better angels would overcome us in that kind of situation.
I would hope so too.
But I mean, like I said, you never know with American politics. But we shall see. Hopefully, we don't cross those kinds of bridges, because if that happened, then I would think that would open up the possibility for Barack Obama to come back and run. We could have a rematch. We could have Trump Obama. How about that for 2020?
Wow, let's try that, huh? It's I agree with Dee that we should hope that our better angels will prevail. It's much the same problem with the eliminating the filibuster in the Senate. It could open the door for unintended consequences.
Right.
But it's a possibility.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think those types of things always sound good when it benefits you. I think
Right.
it was George W. Bush that said, the presidency would be a lot better if it was a dictatorship, as long as I'm the dictator.
Right.
Hey, I've got a wild one for you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Senator Tim Scott.
Oh.
He has come across just recently is very eloquent on the police bill, reform bill, and as in his speech during the convention, going from one generation from, what did they say, plantation to Congress.
Right.
Stirring words. I mean, he could be a real factor too. I might even put him up there with Crenshaw and Haley.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting wild card, and I think he's definitely an eloquent speaker. Definitely, he would be more of an inspirational candidate, I think, than almost any of the others. Maybe Haley could do it as well, but Tim Scott does have that ability to speak with inspiration and to ignite hope in people and ignite some of the goodness, and so I think he might be a really good bridge candidate between the factions of the party.
Well, and if he did get the nomination, that would dispel a lot of the stereotypes about the GOP not being black friendly. So
well, absolutely, and I don't think I think that's just what it is, stereotype. To a large extent, there are going to be people in any party that are going to be antagonistic to minorities, but I think it'd be great for the party, and I think it'd be great for the nation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, he's the first African American senator to be elected from the Southern U.S. since 1881. So
wow,
that's pretty impressive.
And he could be after this election, he could be the senior senator from South Carolina.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we could, and think about that, if Jamie Harrison were to beat Lindsey Graham, you could have South Carolina having 2 African American senators.
Right. Yeah, that's
Times change.
That's right.
times do change. So, Dee, do you have anybody that you think is a long shot or a wild card or could make some make some noise in 2024 that we
Well,
have?
we've covered a lot tonight. The only real big wild card that I keep thinking in the back of my mind is, what if Don Jr. is not the Trump sibling that runs for the nomination, and what if it's Ivanka instead?
Yeah.
The introduction speech for President Trump on the night of his acceptance speech was given by Ivanka. It wasn't Don Jr. And that would have been a great time to highlight him. He's just released another book. He's doing a lot of things that traditional candidates do, but there she was to introduce him. So I think she could be a wild card if hopefully they'll decide amongst the family who's going to run, if any of them do, that they'll get together and not have multiple Trump children running at the same time. But I think she could be a wild card.
Yeah, well, in the Axios poll that we referenced earlier, she is in the top 4. She got 16% of the poll numbers, so she's on the radar, and I think the GOP would love to say they put the first woman in the White House.
Right.
Yeah.
What about you, G? Any other wild cards from you?
I don't really have any. Mr. Crenshaw would be about as close as I would come to like a true long shot to get the nomination, and I think he's got a lot of upside. Like we said, I think he's a person that both parties could, the ones that decide who's going to get there. I think they both could embrace his policies. He works across the aisle, and I think he could be good for the country.
Absolutely. Well, hey, it's been great having Steve. Thank you so much for.
Oh, you're welcome.
For joining us tonight. We've got 55 short days until the November 3rd election. We always like to give a little plug at the end of this to let everyone know. Get registered to vote. Get out there, learn your state's laws, whatever those are. If you're able to vote by mail or absentee, and that's how you feel comfortable, understand what those laws are when the ballots need to go in, because it's our responsibility as citizens to participate. The democracy should not be a spectator sport. It should be a participatory sport. And so we always encourage everybody to get out and vote. Any last words, G-Man?
I just want to say that, we're now available on iHeartRadio, and you can ask your smart speaker to play the GD report and listen to us there, or you can go to our YouTube channel and watch this recording at any time. So, as usual, if you go there, please subscribe, and we'll see you again in about a week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.